Welcome to the Miles to Zen podcast. I had actually wanted to call this episode More Than a Muggle. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to see, hear, and feel things that others can't? Well, today we're talking to Ginette Biro, who's a talented medium, channeler, and founder of Avalon Spirit, as well as the author of this book, Avalon to Aurora. Great book. For some of you, this discussion will be a deepening of understanding that's already there. And for others, it may be completely new. And in this case, think of this conversation as a bridge to explore a topic that's not necessarily mainstream. One of the things that I love the most about Ginette, besides the fact that she's a treasure trove of information and abilities, but she will be the first person to tell you, take what resonates and leave the rest. You may come back to it, you may not, but follow how you're feeling and take what resonates. So let's jump in. Hi, Ginette. Welcome. I'm so thrilled to have you on our podcast today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. This is great.
So I wanted to do a quick intro, and by all means, please add anything. I met Ginette back in 2019, and Ginette is a cosmic channeler, a medium, an educator, a kinesiologist, a motivational speaker, a mom, a wife, a dog mom, and a cat mom as well,
Yeah.
and a gem of a human. It was funny because when we first met, up until the fall of 2019, I'd never met a medium in my life that I knew of. And in the fall, I met four.
Oh, amazing.
And I ended up meeting you because I'd gone for coffee with a woman I just met. And I told her I was looking for a Joe Dispenza book club. And she said, I don't know about any book clubs, but I go to a spirit evening and we're talking about Joe Dispenza's book tomorrow night. And the rest is history.
That is so interesting. That's so neat. I love how that happens too, right? Like when you look back on how you landed at where you're at and you see all the random twists and turns. And, if you hadn't said yes to that book club, does it mean you would have never found this? Not necessarily, because the universe
Yeah.
can reroute many options. But it's like when those random options come up, sometimes the best thing we can do is say yes.
Yeah, it's fun, right? And also over the years, I've really liked to notice the synchronicities when they happen. But
Mhm.
maybe rewinding back for our audience, can you tell people first with the easy stuff, what a medium is, and is there any difference between a medium and a psychic?
Yeah.
And also, what is a cosmic channeler?
Okay. Great questions. So, the difference between a psychic and a medium, because we hear those most often, especially psychic. So, a psychic is somebody that can read the energy of something, of a time, a place, an object. They can tap into the energy of it and gain insights of either events that happened, the person, situations, that kind of thing. They're reading an energy of a something. A medium tends to be able to do that as well, but they will also communicate with spirits. So, like a separate entity. So, past loved ones that people have lost, spirit guides or angels, or, lots of different kind of energies on the other side that are still a conscious entity. Because if we think about it, when someone crosses over, when we die from this body, we leave this body, but our consciousness stays intact. And so it's that conscious entity, as I can call it, that a medium is communicating with. And then if we take it to cosmic channeling, this is where for some people, it kind of has to bend the mind a little bit. Cosmic channeling is higher frequency mediumship, if you will, where you're connecting into different beings that reside in a much higher frequency than where our loved ones tend to, if I can make that very general, because it can be all over the place. And channeling specifically is a little more challenging than mediumship because it requires a greater release by the medium or the channeler. So, for example, if I am doing mediumship, I am like that intermediary person between the person who's coming to see me to communicate with their loved one, right? So there's the sitter, and then there's the spirit, and then there's me in the middle. And I am receiving the questions from the person, asking the spirit world, receiving the messages back from the spirit world, either through seeing something, hearing something, feeling something, and then giving it back to the person, right? So there's that third part piece. Whereas in channeling, that's when that spirit energy will come really, really close and actually merge closer with my frequency. And instead of me seeing, hearing, or feeling it and then repeating it, it comes directly through me so that I'm hearing, seeing, and feeling it at the same moment as the other person is hearing it from my mouth. So it's a tighter merge of frequency. It's kind of like you know, when you have those moments with friends where you're so in sync and maybe you're laughing and you go on a tangent and you keep like finishing each other's sentences and you're just in this zone of flow between the two of you and you're like, how did that even happen? Right? It's kind of like that energy in channeling. You're so in sync that it can come directly through you without pondering, without it using my brain to interpret signs, symbols, images, and bring the message across.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I have so many questions to go from there. And I think what I would like to do is go to like where it's come from. When I say that I'd never met a medium in my life that I knew of,
Mm-hmm.
but when I think about it, you know, my grandmother used to read tea leaves, and my aunt used to read tea leaves. And I know that my grandmother had consulted a psychic when her son ran away from home when he was 15, but it was during the wartime. And the psychic had told her that her husband had unfortunately passed away, and she would get the letter in the mail, and that her son was fine. So I grew up hearing these kind of stories. And then my parents got more and more involved in religion in my mid-teen years. And those kind of stories stopped, but there were still other interesting stories about angels in hospital rooms and animals in garages that shouldn't be there. And here comes my cat.
There's one.
Soda is coming in. Soda Pop likes to make appearances on podcasts. And how
Yes.
about you stay over here, sweetheart?
That's funny. My cat does the same. She'll jump in as often as she can too.
Because now it feels like you hear more about mediums and psychics than we ever did. And am I just imagining that?
Yeah, definitely. I think we've seen a huge increase in consciousness in the last 5 years. There's been just this rapid growth for a lot of people, awakening them to questioning things outside the box, questioning what they knew, whether that's religious upbringings or just very linear upbringings. Like they're questioning more. And part of that questioning is those deeper thoughts of what are we really a part of? Why are we really here? Where do we really come from? Is there only one life? Like those questions. And that's all part of the rising of consciousness. Now, I know when I first started in mediumship, close, yeah, like about 20 years ago, when I first started exploring my own understandings, definitely was not talked about much. And I didn't even talk to many people in my circle either about what I was learning and what I was doing, because I mean, how do you explain it to those that don't have the ears to hear it, right? But what's been interesting is as I've gone through my journey, like when I first started, I even when I was reading for people and I was busy, it was always by word of mouth. I didn't advertise, I didn't talk about it. It's just if you heard about it, then people would call me and that was fine. But there is such a desire now with this shift in consciousness to understand. And a lot of that understanding is coming through mediums and channelers and psychics right now because they're able to speak about things that we haven't been able to talk about before, but they can speak about them because now people are starting to have the ears to listen. Right. So I think it's a really exciting time. And so, you know, growing up like you did, where you would hear these stories, we would hear those stories growing up in like almost myth form. Right.
Yeah.
But it's beautiful how it's becoming so part of the regular conversation because in truth, it's a very natural way to be, to be connected into energetics, to the spirit realm, to astrology, to all of those things. To be connected in is actually our very natural way of being. We have a dormant pineal gland, if you will, in our brain. That little pine cone like gland is actually, they've been doing research and it's connected to our capacities for being psychics or mediums. And that those that utilize that skill set have what they would consider an enlarged pineal gland. But what spirit says is it's actually, it's shrunken down because it's been dormant and it's coming back alive again. You know, and lots of ancient cultures have known about that, which is why, like Buddhas, like you see in the back here, they always have that little thing on the top of their head and it represents that pineal gland. It's like a pine cone. So you often see that representing consciousness, or it's on the staff of different statues. On the top of the staff is a pine cone because it represents that psychic capacity within all of us that we have. So it's this neat time to be alive right now with it all coming back online, but it's also kind of bewildering because there's so much stuff coming out about it all right now. And so it seems like it's the new fad, but really it's us remembering what we've known in lifetimes before.
And I think also the more we learn about space, the more open we are to possibilities, shall I say. I remember last year I was at the Los Angeles Museum of Modern Art, and they had this cosmic display. I think you can see it if you Google it, about, Earth in relation to everything out there, all of space. And it feels like if Earth was all a desert, all sand, and we are one grain of sand, that it just seems to me very counterintuitive and not logical to think that there's not more than what meets the eye out there.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I love that thought, right? Like I really love that thought because it really works well for kind of like a left brain linear thinking mind of the probability of Earth being the only inhabited planet in all of the galaxies. And that's if we're talking about just third dimensional understandings. If we add in then multiple dimensional theories, like we aren't the only grain of sand that there is, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
and that's why I love that thought because you can't help but ponder when you look at it from that perspective. Like, oh, yeah, there's so much more that we don't know.
yeah. So one thing that I love about some of the talks that you've given that I've listened to is that you always say, take what resonates and leave the rest. And that's what I would hope that any of our listeners would do for today as well. If this resonates, fantastic. And if it doesn't, maybe it just doesn't right now, or it won't ever. And maybe talk about, how do you distinguish between somebody who's out for no good and somebody who's a genuine medium and is there to help you?
That's a good question. You know, first of all, it's so unfortunate, but I think we see this in any industry, if we want to put it that way, right? There are those that are really qualified and wanting to do the work because they're passionate about it or it has purpose. And then there's those that, want to make a gimmick of it. And it's unfortunate that there's such like a long history of the gimmicky nature of mediums and psychics, the crystal ball and the
All the
long
scarves.
flowy dresses and the scarves. I know, right?
And like a mole with some crazy chin
Yes,
hair.
totally. And the crazy hair for sure. You have to have the crazy hair. And it's a shame in a sense because I think one of the best ways, I mean, truly it comes back to our discernment. And if we're in tune with ourselves and who we are in the world, right? Just who you are in the world, then you can kind of feel in your body. You can discern what feels like something is right and what feels wrong. And that comes back to frequency. What you're discerning is the frequential nature of a thing, whether it's a place, a person, an object, right? Does this feel good? Does this feel bad in its most basic form? And so if ever someone is going to see a psychic or a medium or a channeler and they get a feeling that feels off in their presence, that's your first sign to trust it. Something's off. If it's off, it's simply off. right? Like if
Mhm.
something smells, it smells. You're not making up the smell. It's there, right? Something is off energetically. And then I think also too, if they use fear, I think fear is a big piece. If someone's using fear in their messages for you without really good reasoning, and what I mean by that is sometimes, and it's very rare, but I've read for people sometimes where I've had to say, listen, it's really important that you don't say, go on this trip on this date because it's lining up to be a life-ending event. Can you reroute it? That's happened like twice in almost 15 years of readings. It's not a common thing, but like otherwise, everything should always be brought through with positivity, right? And not fear inducing, because the only time spirit will bring through something that could be fearful, like that extreme situation I'm talking about, is literally if you're at a threat of your life being ended early and they don't want it. They're like, listen, it's not in your path. Don't go do this thing, right? Otherwise, there shouldn't be anything that really induces a life-threatening fear that comes through, because it's always about support and it's always about helping you. And also, if someone's like, listen, I can heal you, but you need to pay me $4,000 for these stones and crystals. Well, I mean, that's not accurate either, right? Because anyone who is really truly standing in their power with their gift, and again, it's a gift of consciousness and source that moves through them. If they're standing in that truth, then they're not going to make you have to pay all this extra for your benefit, right? If you want to take a course and learn from something from someone, well, that's a different story. But if you're going for a reading and an experience, it shouldn't have all these add-ons that will save you or save your soul, right? So any of those things that feel outlandish, feel fear-based, that's a huge indicator that it's not accurate. It's absolutely not accurate. The other thing too is if things are very, very vague, it's likely not accurate either. You know, and in that case, the medium or the channeler or the psychic should be able to say, I'm sorry, I can't make a good link. And I've had that with some people. It doesn't happen very often either, but sometimes you just can't read for somebody for whatever reason. And, you know, instead of sitting there coming up with random vague things like, there's a dog. Did you have a dog? You know, not that that's a bad question at all, but when they're all very vague, it's like they're searching for something. And a medium or a psychic should be able to give you some pinpoint accuracy very quickly if the reading is going to work. And if it's not, then they should have the moral standard to say, listen, I can't read for you right now for whatever reason it's not working. Let's book and try again. So, yeah. Common sense is what it seems like to me. However, I can understand if you're not in this field, and especially if you're wrapped in grief, which a lot of people are, then they're searching so strongly to hold on to something that's where it's really unfortunate that people can take advantage of people. And that just hurts my heart to think about that.
So moving into, say someone's passed on and someone really wants to find out if they can actually talk to them. Explain to us how does that work? How can someone, if someone has just lost a loved one and they want to talk to them, how does that work? What would that look like?
Yeah. So it depends on lots of different factors. So basically, it all depends on how ready the spirit is to communicate after they pass. So sometimes spirits, if they have a very traumatic passing, say, or they really didn't want to cross over, then they might take a little bit longer to basically go through the life review and come to terms with how they passed, why they passed, where they're at now, before they can come back and communicate. So that's why sometimes people will try to see a medium to connect with their parent and say their parent passed away 8 years ago, and they're like, they never come to see me. They never come through. They might still not be ready to come through because they're still going through their afterlife review or they're settling with it. And one thing that's really important to know is that there's no time on the other side like we have time here. So 8 years to them is not 8 years at all. It simply is until it isn't, which is hard for us to wrap our mind around because we like linear time, right? So sometimes it can be that. However, there have been times too where, you know, someone passed not even 24 hours and they were already able to come through and communicate very clearly, right? So it really depends on the energy of the soul and what they're going through, oftentimes they will spend the first couple of our human days very close to the family in ways that the family can feel them. And that's why people often talk about, like, my father passed away, but I could feel him so much. And I felt him one night, 2 days after he died, and I felt him at the funeral. They'll often stay very present so that they can try and bring that comfort to their family. And then it's quite common for them after that time for them to kind of feel more distant. And that's because they're also giving space for the people here to mourn, but also begin to move forward. Because sometimes if they stay too close, people can feel their energy and they don't want to move forward. So I hope that helps answer it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember even in university, I had a friend whose father passed away, and they kept his body in the living room for a week. And at the time, I mean, I was fascinated by this, but also a little bit like, "Whew."
Yeah.
Um, and he said he wouldn't have missed that for the world, being there in that week.
Hmm.
And so that just always stuck with me. I think that's really nice. And I think that I certainly would be contacting a medium if I had loved ones pass away. I mean, I think, why not? Why
Yeah.
not? Why not check in
Yeah.
and
You
see?
know, as I was going to say a rule of thumb, but again, kind of go with what you feel in your gut. But oftentimes it's good to give the soul a little bit of time before you come and see a medium, just because they might be crossing over fine and well, but they're not quite in the energy to be able to come back and communicate fully through a medium. Because again, like that's a whole different story. They have to try and figure out the medium's frequency plus the medium's language, because every medium develops sort of their own language with the spirit world. And they have to try and figure that out. And so if they're so fresh to the other side, they might not be able to bring it through yet. Right. So I mean, there isn't a rule of thumb. I know some teachings say, you can't read for anybody unless they've been gone for 6 months already, or one
Oh,
year, or
wow.
3 months, or I don't think there's a hard, fast rule. I do know from all of the readings I've done that often it has been beneficial to give it a little bit of time, at least like a month or so. But again, it depends. Because again, I've read for someone and they hadn't even been gone 24 hours.
Oh, wow. Do
Yeah.
you have any stories that you can share that really are a good example of that? Of, somebody passing or anything that, that really stuck with you?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's so many stories. Um, One of them was this baby. It was a baby that had passed away. And um, this was one that was able to communicate really, really quickly because they had been so recently on the other side before they came into their body. But they were able to describe how long they lived for after, which wasn't very long. I think it was a certain amount of hours. But they were able to describe the hospital room and what their mom was wearing, what the dad was wearing,
Wow.
what was in the bassinet, what kind of clothing they had on, to really validate their presence with the parents so that they knew that it wasn't all for nothing, because sometimes parents would wonder, like, well, what was all that for? And, it's in soul journeys of sometimes there's a body malfunction and the soul will then come around again in another pregnancy. Other times there's an experience in it for the family in grieving that baby. But it was really neat to be able to see how detailed this little soul could explain everything that went on, and it hadn't even been very long, and then,
Wow.
but then there's other stories where I've had people come to look for like a family member. I can't remember if this one was an uncle or a dad. I don't recall, but the imagery is like seared in my mind when I called to look for that person. So the person came to sit, sorry, the sitter came and talked to me, right? So the person that wanted the reading, they came and they sat and they're like, I'm looking for this person. And so then I would close my eyes, tune into that frequency and ask the spirit world for this person to come forward. And when we saw him, or when I saw him, he was fishing in a river on the other side. He had all of his fishing gear on. He had the chest waders on. He was fly fishing in the river. And when I came upon him and I called him forward, he turned around. He's like, "Oh yeah." And he put his fishing rod down and then he came over to talk. And when I described this whole scene, she was like, that's what he did all the time. He was always fishing and he loved fly fishing. And it was so neat that he was able to be carrying that on the other side. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't fully grasp is that when we cross over, we really don't cease to exist. We are completely still us, just not in the body. And again, that's a hard thing to wrap the mind around, but I've seen it so many times on the other side where they have the same personality, they have the same humor. They'll still be cracking jokes from the other side, you know? And it's just beautiful to see the detail that they can bring through sometimes in those stories.
Oh, that's so cool. And you also had an experience of the other side.
Yes,
And
I
and
did.
what did you find?
What did it look like? Yeah. So in 2019, so right around the time that we met, actually, I had had a surgery, a routine surgery, in which I ended up having a near-death experience. Um, I did not die on the table, but I was given the option to, and I'll explain that in a little bit. Um, what was really interesting is by this point, I'd already been working as a medium for about 10 years. So I had a really good understanding of the afterlife and what spirit stuff is like, right? The two stories I shared with you were before my near-death experience. And so I thought I understood a lot. And what was so interesting is when I had my own experience, I remember there was this energy leading into the surgery that was like outer worldly. Something was just different. And when they put me under, I instantly arrived on the other side and I knew I was on the other side because what I realized is when I do readings, I'm always kind of looking into something, kind of like looking through a window. You can see everything, but you're looking through a window, right? Whereas this time my feet were actually on the grass and that's where I landed. Like I just appeared, my bare feet were on the grass. I could feel the grass. I could see the blades of grass. I could zoom into the blades if I wanted, just with my eyes. And I was walking up this hill and it was this beautiful blue, vibrant blue sky. And I happened upon this kind of barbecue summer picnic like thing. And it's funny because if I would have chosen my afterlife experience, I would have thought I would pick a tropical island because that tropics is my favorite. But there's such a warmth and comfort to summer barbecues and picnics because we used to have them all the time when I was a kid. And so I happened upon this. I could see the tablecloths, the food. My grandmother who has passed was there, and there was tons of people there that I knew from this lifetime that had crossed over. And like I said, I knew exactly where I was. I knew I was on the other side. It wasn't like, where am I? I
And
knew,
you didn't have to walk up a staircase and
no, I
through any
didn't.
lights. You
They
were
just
boom,
like
you were right
brought
there.
me right there. And then there was all these other souls coming from past lifetimes, and I was giving them hugs and reconnecting and like, what have you been up to since I last saw you? Like, it was that normal. And I felt entirely like me. I didn't feel like a ghost. I didn't feel like a see-through spirit. Like I was completely me. And so I spent what felt like hours there with them. And what was interesting pertaining to your question is I had an opportunity a little bit later to look at my life blueprint and also have a conversation with my spirit guides as well as my own higher self. And the really neat thing about that conversation was when I was talking to my higher self, and this is when they had kind of been asking, like, do you want to stay or do you want to go back? And I was like, well, of course I want to go back. I have stuff I want to do. And there was no fear in that answer. I didn't feel like they were making me stay or forcing me back. It just was really up to me. But I remember looking at my higher self, and I will say she looked just like me, but I knew that was my higher self, my whole self, right? And I'm an aspect of that right now in this lifetime. But I was also her looking at the me that's talking to you right now. So I was both, and that was normal. And when I saw the absolute value that my higher self had for our human lifetimes and each soul human experience and the beauty of it, there was no doubt in my mind that I wanted to come back because of how amazing it is when we're here on this planet. Even though we go through struggles and it's really challenging, we're gaining so much wisdom. And so, what was so neat is that whole experience, I felt entirely like myself. There's no part of me that was like, oh my gosh, my body. Even when they're like, listen, if you choose to stay here on this side with us, it's a simple flick of a switch and you'll have a massive heart attack on the table. They won't revive you. No part of me felt a fear of like, no, no, I need that body because I was entirely where I was on the other side. Like that was me. And life carried on as I could see, and like life would go on, or life could go on back where I was with my body. It was like this undeniable proof to me, because I had the experience, that life absolutely goes on. And I'd already known that, but to experience it was something else. And so I think that's one of my most favorite things to share with people is the fact that like when our loved ones cross over and they're coming back to communicate, they're still entirely them and more. And they want to bring through the validity of, listen, life carries on and I will see you again. I absolutely will. It's just a time where we're apart in your perspective right now, but we will see each other.
So when you were there on the other side, was there, that human part that's in you now that would have been like, holy smokes, this is so cool, or my mind's being blown, or it was just once you get there, then you're all accepting?
That's a great question. I think it's probably a bit of everything, because there was a realization of knowing where I was. Like I was like, I'm literally on the other side. I'm in heaven. I'm in the afterlife. There was that realization of like, wow, this is 100% real, right? Like 100%, not even like 99.9% like I believed it was before. So there was a little bit of awe, but there was also this absolute ease and comfort in it being exactly right.
Okay.
Like it just was exactly right. So it was absolutely blissful, but it wasn't blissful in excess. It just was bliss and harmonious, and it everything makes sense there. And that's the amazing thing. We come back here and there's so much we disconnect from. Part of being human, right? We disconnect from a lot. And so it's much more confusing being a human here than it is being on the other side. And but at the same time, I say that, and it doesn't mean like, let's all hurry up and get over there either. It means make the most of everything you can here, because when I was talking to my higher self, and again, seeing her perspective of my human existence, there was just so much value in every lesson. Even the hardships was like this like soul earned wisdom that I could bring back to level up next time around. Kind of like when you look at your university schooling and stuff. Like it's not easy, right? But like you earned it. You earned that wisdom that you got in your degree or your
Mhm.
master's or whatever. It's like that. And so why would you give up on the capacity to gain so much in a lifetime if you don't have to? If that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And and so thinking of our humaning experience, and it's certainly not without its joys and challenges. Is there in your cosmic connections, so to speak, is there interest that you've seen from the people that are connecting or the beings that are connecting to you about this human experience that we're having? So not only I can imagine that our human experience is super interesting for our higher selves and our relatives and friends on the other side, but linking to your cosmic channeling, what's the interest if we are just a grain of sand in there's so much going on out there? What's the interest in
Mm.
us humans? Why are they coming to talk to
Yeah.
you and to others?
What do they want to know?
What do they want to
Uh,
know?
there's a bunch of different levels actually. So part of it is they really love and admire the innocent emotional capacity of humans, right? Like we are a highly emotional species, right? We have very high highs, very low lows, and everything in between. And although that can be a roller coaster ride, it's also from a cosmic or a spiritual level highly prized because of the amount of learning that can happen within that emotional swing. If you think about when everything is controlled and the same, you don't really learn as much,
Right.
right? But when you swing to highs and lows, you actually have the opportunity to gain so much more knowledge. So they see that as a big value, but also a potential for our demise. It also can, like, it has the capacity to create or destroy, essentially. They also, though, recognize that humanity is at such a beautiful tipping point right now in our consciousness where so many people are opening, and the earth is also helping to push this awakening to shift the dynamics on our planet because the planet can't sustain itself the way it is. So they're coming in to also help support and sustain or improve the planet's capacity to live a long, 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 long planetary life, right? Because if you destroy something in our solar system, it has a massive ripple effect throughout the entire uh, galaxy that we're in. So they have a vested interest in that. On another level, though, a lot of them have told me that one of the reasons why Earth itself is so beneficial and so sacred to them is because Earth is sort of viewed like a giant hard drive in the universe that has memories of so many universal things within the frequency of our planet. So our planet's also kind of like this SD drive that they want to preserve and not lose or destroy because it has so much cosmic history to it too. So, I mean, each of those could be huge tangents that we could go down, but in general, there's a lot of reasons why they're interested in our ascension.
Yeah, obviously my cat's interested in that as well because
Like,
he's come back. He's like, oh, that's insane. This is a good topic. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, so going from way out there to right back, is I've heard you talk differently than the average person when they're talking about mind, body, spirit. And I know that we've heard of that concept that you are not your thoughts. You can be the observer of your thoughts. And then you were talking about the body as well in a very interesting perspective. And I wonder if you can share that
yeah,
about
sure.
that we're also not our body.
Yeah. So this is really interesting. There's a common thread that the body is just a vehicle for the mind and the spirit, right? And I just watched something on this. Was it this morning even? I was up really early, so I don't know if it was today or yesterday, but where it was this same idea of like your body's just a vehicle and it's your soul that is doing, whatever it's learning. What I've learned though is that we talk so much about mind, body, spirit wellness, mind, body, spirit relaxation, but we're missing a big part. We're missing the actual consciousness of the body. The three parts of that trinity have consciousness, and we are only giving credit to two of them. We're giving credit to the consciousness of the spirit, right? People are opening up to that. We're giving credit to the consciousness of the mind, right? And how what we think can create our reality, can create abundance in our bodies or not. But we're not recognizing that the body itself has a consciousness. And if we want to look at that on a scientific level, we can look at how a cell, for example, when it goes to replicate, the nucleus in the cell is going to look at the cytoplasm around it and look at, what do we have here? So we're coming down, time to replicate. How are we going to replicate based on what we have in here? There's we could compare it to a thought consciousness. If it is provided with lots of goodness, it can replicate in its highest genetic program. If it is surrounded by a lot of environmental toxins, negative thoughts, and all that, it might replicate into a cancer cell, right? But it is looking for intel from its environment. And then environment is in our body. And they've also done studies how, like, the heart has brain cell like tissue where it actually carries memories. And when people get heartbroken, they're literally heartbroken because there's a memory piece in there that is grieving. And they have found brain like memory capacity in the stomach. Spirit also told me it's in the uterus. And I don't know if they've found that yet, but essentially every organ and aspect of our body actually carries a level of consciousness. And so if we look at the body as a whole, it is more than just a vessel. It is a
Mhm.
conscious organism that is further amplified by the brain and the spirit. But if we really want to invoke the concept of the Trinity, we have to invoke the understanding that the body is conscious. And so an example of this is like, if ever people have had an experience where somebody is passing away and they're in their mind, they're like, I'm ready to go. And they've said their goodbyes to everybody. Spiritually, they're totally ready to go. They're at peace. They understand. They're seeing the others on the other side, but the body won't let go. And nobody can explain why the body won't let go. And it's because the body's consciousness is not ready to go. Right. And so if we start tapping into the consciousness of the body, like we've been tapping into the mind and the spirit, allowing both of those to talk, right? Because we'll talk to our own minds. We're dialoguing with our minds all day long, right? The ego comes
Yeah,
in and is
yeah.
like, no, we're not doing that. And we have to be like, hold on, ego. Is that really what we want to do? Like, okay, fine, maybe not. Like we dialogue all the time. We dialogue all the time with spirit, with our spirit self, our higher selves. We have to also dialogue with the body and give the body space to talk back. And if we do that, we're then tapping into an entirely new energetic structure of being human on this planet.
Well, and what a great perspective, because I think so many of us have not been terribly kind to our bodies, whether it's pushing. I used to do all these crazy athletic feats of, going up mountains and just pushing myself to no end. Um, and some of the other things in university, which we won't discuss.
Right.
But I thinking of it with that lens is potentially a way to just be a lot healthier, because if you think of your body as not, well, still you, but not you, we tend to be pretty mean to ourselves often when we look in the mirror, or when we can't do something, or aging or injury or whatever it is. And when I first heard you talk about that, that gave me a real sense of compassion for my body that I hadn't had before. And I wanted to just share that perspective with people, because I think it's just such a cool perspective that can make you be holistically kinder, I think.
Yeah. From another level, if anyone wants to entertain this thought, and again, take what resonates, but if we really tap into the unlimitedness of the body, like we bring in the consciousness and we tap into the Trinity, like truly, we're stepping up into a massively different capacity as human beings, like massively. This is where spiritual gifts become completely normal. This is where the capacity for telekinesis, teleportation, telepathy is already starting big time with lots of people. When we bring the body online, we're stepping into this much higher level of consciousness, which is why we have different cosmic beings helping us to get online with this. Because keeping the body sick, we'll just say sick, keeping illness in bodies, disease in the bodies helps prevent that true awakening of consciousness of the Trinity. And there's truly nothing more powerful than that Trinity aspect within the universe. So it's a big, big piece that we are just starting to understand and have compassion for.
Oh, well, that is mind blowing, but body blowing as
Yeah,
well.
right. Yeah.
All blowing. So I know we've been chatting for a while, and I could chat to you all day, but I'm wondering, if to wrap things up, if you had some wisdom from your medium cosmic channeler perspective
Mm-hmm.
that you could share with everyone, what would that be?
That would be conscious choice. That would be a lesson that I brought back with me from that near-death experience from my guides is our capacity for conscious choice in everything we do is so much more valuable than I think we give ourselves credit for. I think oftentimes we get easily pulled into, I was going to say stuck, but I'm going to say easily pulled into the thought of like, why is the world this way? Why is this happening? Kind of poor me, victim mentality. And that's a very fair and valid thing because there's been a lot going on and a lot changing and a lot people have had to confront. But in every single situation, we have the capacity for conscious choice. Sometimes those choices are really big choices. Sometimes they're really small. Sometimes all we can choose is a shift in perspective, but we can choose that shift in perspective. We are never without any kind of a choice. And I know some people might hear that and be like, well, what about this? What about that? And I understand, but that's where I'm speaking perspective. And I'll share one of mine just to give an example is I got really sick this summer. And at one point when I was in the hospital for hours and hours and hours, um, it was awful. It was awful. Awful is the word I was using, and horrible, like big words, right? And I remember sitting there, it was like 1 a.m. And I was like, this is horrible. And I'm like, okay, wait, what is my conscious choice in this moment? It's like, well, what could be worse? I'm like, okay, being in labor would be worse than this. I wouldn't want to be in labor. If I had the choice between this or labor, what would I pick? I would pick this. I'm like, okay, so here we go. If I had the choice between the two, I would literally pick this situation that I'm in right now. So I'm like, okay, look at that. This situation is better than that, right? And although that might seem trivial, what that does is that shift in perspective there helps take a ton of stressors off my body, helps shift my mindset perspective, helps me integrate back with my spirit a little bit more so that I essentially can pull my energy up a little bit and to try and help healing in my case in that moment, right? It also makes it just a bit more bearable, and it brings back the power of choice within self in those moments when we feel everything is being taken away, right? So conscious choice in everything we do, from are we going to eat an entire bag of chips? Does that help us? Maybe it does in a moment, right? But if you choose consciously, then you're choosing consciously, all the way to making big lifetime decisions. If you're purposeful in why you're doing what you're doing and you're thinking about why it is, whether, like, no matter what it is, then you're living your life in such a higher frequency, and the world will work better for you if you align with that because you feel empowered.
Oh, I love that. And I'm all over understanding how people are making decisions and why people are deciding certain things. And I love that perspective. It's essentially getting, your higher self involved
Yeah.
in that decision-making process.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite quotes is Wayne Dyer. And he says, when you change the way you look at things, the things that you look at change.
100%. Yeah.
And perception and how you are perceiving things is so key.
Mm.
I've been in both. I agree.
Yeah. Right.
Anyways, well, thank you so much, Ginette, for
Uh,
being on the podcast. It was such a pleasure.
Honored.
And I'm sure we'll have a bunch of questions. So where can people find you and find your company if they're interested in learning more?
Yeah. So avalonspirit.com is our home base, our website. And there's everything we offer there, from courses to different mediums and practitioners to help you on your journey, as well my podcast, which you can find on the website. Also, the Ginette Biro podcast. And then I'm on all different social media too. So Instagram, Facebook, YouTube under Ginette Biro Medium, and the book and my book, which I wrote about my near-death experience. So it's called Avalon to Aurora, a medium's near-death experience, and that's on Amazon or the website.
It's a great book. I highly recommend it. Thank you so much, Ginette.
Thank you.
Wasn't that a great conversation? Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to contact Ginette, please see the show notes for her details. And if you got something out of this episode, please like, subscribe, follow anywhere where you listen: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. And if you can please take the time to leave a review, because that definitely helps, especially if you listen on Apple Podcasts, and it will help more people access these inspiring and perspective shifting conversations with our guests. And I'm so delighted to be reading the beautiful comments on my various platforms and appreciate you listening so much. So thank you again, and see you next time.